Welcome to Culture Couch Live this week. We've got Jez, Chris, and Em. How are we, guys?
Hey,
All good?
Ruzzy. There's Chris.
How's it going, Ruzzy?
Very, very well, thank you. Hey, let's jump straight into it. We've been asked to come in and do some workshops for some boards recently, probably over the last 6 to 12 months, which I guess coincided with the reopening and COVID, which is not unusual. And we've spoken a lot about that on the Culture Couch Live. And Jez, you brought up an interesting conversation and a few questions in one of your workshops in relation to the board you were working with. So we might just open with that, Jez, and just explain that, and then we'll sort of explore the role of the board and how we recommend, either using PBD or what are the responsibilities and how we can maintain a really healthy culture, but sitting at that board level.
Yeah, well, the question this week was around from one of the boards we're working with. Was around given all the, I guess, reports and investigations, e.g. the Royal Commission into the banking sector, where organisations have got poor culture or this bad behaviour occurring in the organisation. The question was, this board was, how do we know when this is going on? How do we stop that from occurring? Because there's huge risk for board members if they don't act on unacceptable, inappropriate behaviour, because obviously, they're the ones that potentially are held to account. So it was a really interesting conversation, and it's one that's becoming more common in our workshops. And there was a series of points which we can discuss as we go through. But probably the first one we discussed was making sure that we as a board are organised as a team.
Yeah.
Because again, often people come into boards from different sectors, from different areas of life. They come in and they sit at the table, and they may not even see much of each other in between board meetings. So the very first thing we discussed was actually take the time to get yourself set up as a team and set yourself some rules, some boundaries, understand what you expect from each other.
Yeah. So
that when you meet, that your meetings are at least following some sort of code of conduct, or as we would call it, a culture code.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing, and I guess we can explore some of the other key points as we go through.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing is, as you said, Murph, to set it up. What is the board there for? And I guess part of the problem is a potential disconnect if you're starting, as your scoreboard is your share price, because if you're talking about values and, what we stand for as an organisation, you've just got to be careful you don't take your eye off the ball. It's similar to a footy club. If we want to stand for something as a footy club, but every time me as a coach on the board meeting and all they talk about is, well, you're 12th on the ladder. Melbourne's a really good example. Then there's an immediate disconnect. And I think, Murph, that's probably what you're talking about firstly, Em, isn't it? It's really here's what the company values are, the culture code. Is the board aware of that? And are they supportive? Because unless you can start with that, Em, you're starting with a disconnect already. You're on your gee whiz.
The smart team.
It was a big start.
Yeah, big start.
That's the first on the Culture Couch Live, I reckon. That's first. Episode 58. Well done. Sorry, go on.
The smart teams marry the two together, right?
Yeah.
I remember probably 2 months ago working with one of our teams here. They actually had a bit of turnover at the board. So the CEO got us to come in. We did about an hour. We did a high-level overview of the work and the system itself. We spoke about the culture code that the organisation had created. And we spoke about how the board can essentially play the role of, at best, objective coaches for the actual operational executive team. And our CEO, who's our client, is a wonderful lady and very smart, and she was brilliant at getting the two worlds together and asking, this is what we want you to hold us accountable to and what we expect of this team as a board. And I can tell you, since we did that, her relationship has skyrocketed, and the impact of our support for her has been better than ever. And it's really been of great benefit to the impact on the actual team itself, because they provide objective coaching to the operational executive team in cahoots and in sync with the language of their culture code. So it's worked out to be, and that's what smart teams do, I find.
And I think, I mean, if we start with that, which we all agree with, I guess, Chris, then it comes back to how much do I get involved? How much do I sit back? And I can only speak for the Swans and Melbourne, a little bit at North Melbourne as well, but sort of thing. But that's a balance as well, isn't it? Like when you're on a board, if we've established our culture code and we're really aligned with that, the next stage is what is my role? There needs to be real role clarity around what the expectations are and trust. I mean, we talk about trust so often on this, and trust is an action. So what does an action of trust look like from to the CEO, the executive, and vice versa?
It's interesting because I think what you're looking at when you're on a board, I think typically you're there not as a board member as much as a mentor to the people that are doing the day-to-day, right? And in those executive roles, and being a coach in those moments to maybe ask challenging questions, kind of inspecting what you might expect of those executives, but being able to have those mentoring conversations to drive that culture. It's interesting what Emil's sharing there is that you had a proactive CEO say, hey, listen, this is what we've done and this is what we expect you to hold us accountable. How often does it get turned the other way? And I think that's the right direction for that conversation. I don't think the board necessarily can come to the CEO, but it may have to be one of those things. If the culture of the organization isn't really well defined and there isn't clarity, certainly between those two levels in the organization.
Yeah. And Murph, what do we do when we sense something is awry? Like, I guess that, because, let's say a board, what's a board meet once a month and the CFO reports and the CEO reports and some, et cetera, et cetera. So we're starting to smell out a little bit of BS or, this doesn't make sense. What's the role of the board then? And how do we approach it? Because I think that came up, correct me if I'm wrong, within the conversation that you had.
Yeah, it did. And it's really important that there were some sort of key points we discussed. The first one is obviously to get organised, as we've discussed. The second one is to stay really close to your executive team. So build a relationship with them. Don't interfere in their day-to-day running. But as Chris said, mentor and coach. And if you do that, well, then you'll start to get a feel for what's going on a little bit better.
Yeah.
The third point we discussed was spend time in the business. So go and spend some time in the business and get to know it. Don't interfere, but just get to know what's happening, listen to the conversation. So take a sort of high level view. And then probably the last 2 points were take the job seriously. So I think sometimes board members can just turn up. And they hope that the chairman's doing the right thing. But I think read the papers, spend some time in the business. Like all these things will go to you doing a good job. And then finally, which is your question, I think, is when you get the feeling that something's wrong, don't ever, ever, ever allow it to be swept under the table. Because 100%, I'd almost certainly say in every case where we read in the newspaper where there's been an issue with culture in an organisation, I'd be really surprised if someone at a board either didn't know or hadn't heard something.
Yeah.
So when you hear something or when you feel something not right, then you have to investigate because 9 times out of 10, there probably is something going on. And if there isn't, well, then there's no harm. All you've done is wasted a little bit of time doing an investigation. But in that process, you've probably got to build a stronger relationship with the executive anyway.
Yeah,
and that's part of the coaching and mentoring, though, isn't it? Like, if you see yourself, and I think, like you said, it comes down to who's on the board. Because if you see yourself as just picking up a paycheck, I don't know what board members get paid, and I'll spend, I'll get my half day, full day a month, and really, I'm going to walk in, pick up my paycheck, look at some board papers, listen to a couple of presentations. You got the wrong people on the board, and that's probably what I noticed a little bit without mentioning the club. It's like I guarantee some of the people there just didn't care. They were sort of there because it was pretty cool to be on a footy club board. You
Yeah.
could tell their mates at the pub. Oh, Roosie said this the other day, and such and such was in, and I heard about that. So to you, it again, rocket science. A lot of it comes back to behaviours.
Yeah.
Conversations. But
Yeah.
even going, have you got the right people on the board? Have you got the right people on the bus? That becomes super important, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think that's what I've written here as we're talking is the smart executives that I've worked with, had the pleasure to, they set up the board to be their accountability mechanism, both from a results perspective and making decisions using their values. So when they get to the board meeting, it's, did we do what we said we were going to do? And so that at the end of a board meeting, they go, right, before next one, this is what we're going to do to achieve our next milestone, our next marker. And please, hold me to account if we do or don't, right? And then secondly, when under pressure, as we all know, because the board, as Jez has pointed, they should not, they're not going to be in the day-to-day. They shouldn't have that emotional connection to the goings on. And that's, again, I guess the power of outside facilitation and outside sentiment, which we provide, is that, again, the board can then be objective and say, look, it seems like you're going to go down this road. Does that live A, B, C value? Because they're not going to, when the brain gets emotional, it's not as efficient and powerful at making decisions. So again, the board can almost act, if done well, a bit like outside facilitation. Hence the power of the outside work that we do for teams.
It's interesting because one of the board members that stands out for me is one of the Melbourne. Obviously, we struggled at Melbourne, particularly first and second year, and it was exactly that. I loved it because he would hold me accountable. But I knew that he trusted me.
Yeah,
that's
huge. That's huge.
Before, I knew that he was actually asking the question not to be a smart ass, not because he wanted to grandstand, not because he wanted to put me under the pump. He just wanted an answer and wanted to hold me accountable. And I remember a couple of times, we a board meeting and someone would come and say, I apologize for such. I said, mate, I was fine with that. Like that to me is the classic example why a board exists.
Yeah.
No grandstanding, trying to help. Can I do anything for you, Roosie? Is that blah, 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 blah. And Chris, a really good discussion. So I suppose in a sense, it's really, we're talking a lot on the culture couch about the same thing. So it's really an extension. The board's got to be an extension of the organisation or vice versa. And again, that's probably, as we're having this discussion, we just got to be careful. There's a mass connect. They just come in once a month, as I said, listen, and really don't see themselves as part of the business. Share prices going up, everything's fine. So talk to that maybe, Chris, in that sense.
Well, it's interesting how that board member handled that with you, right? Bring up in the meeting, but then it's the sidebar with you to make sure that there wasn't any trust violated. And I think that's a key role where somebody has self-awareness to understand that, that's somebody coming into it with the right frame of mind, coming from the right place, that's wanting to have a genuine impact. And I think at the end of the day, if you've got board members, if you are the board member, that's what you're looking for. It can be difficult because there's no necessarily a rule book out there for those roles, right? So how do we work our way through that in an organization? I think that's a perfect example of it, right? It's just making sure that we're connected still and we're not violating that trust.
I was just going to say, connected, have the conversation, and care. I guess
care.
we talk about it all the time, don't we, Murph? It's like you can see care. Care's an action. Following up after a meeting, making a phone call.
If you care, you make the time, right? Care equals time.
Care equals time. Care equals time and conversation. So, Murph, again, most of these things we're talking about are not dissimilar to the things we've spoken about on the Culture Couch Live. So what are the human elements of being on a board? It's a really good place to start, Murph.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a question.
The conclusion on it.
The natural traits of just being a caring person, just get down to human behavior. We talk about, are you the leader you wish you had? 25 points of that I wrote. So sometimes, I mean, we all say this jokingly, well, maybe not joking. The reason we can do the things we do is, you know, the intellectuals that we are, is because it's simple. You know, and sometimes we overcomplicate it. Murph, you say that a lot in the workshop. Don't overcomplicate it. What's the human behavior behind trust or care or time or feedback? It's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah, 100%. And again, we're talking here about the behaviours of the board and understanding the behaviours of the organisation. We're not talking about the technical side of the board, you know, setting strategy, managing the finance. That from our end, that's almost a given that there'll be talent on the board.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about, as you say, Ruzi, creating the environment where people feel safe to speak and put things on the table and raise things they need to address them. Staying close to your executive team. I've been fortunate to work in some wonderful organisations, and Geelong Football Club with Frank Costa and Brian Cook. Frank Costa on the board and Brian Cook and his executive. The way that Frank conducted himself, he was chairman, but he was prepared to take a back seat when he needed to. He didn't have to be face organisation, so it didn't have to be about Frank, but he was always there. He always had Brian's back, and Brian knew that.
Yeah.
And it was just a wonderful thing to watch over a period of time. And there's no doubt in my mind that was central to Geelong's success.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, you talk about this all the time, Rizzy. The most important thing that was role clarity.
Yeah.
Understanding what is my role as the chairman, what is my role as a board member, what is the executive CEO stroke executive's role with the board. And so getting that role clarity, but staying really close in it. Not we meet once a month and we've got distance. We've got to stay close.
Yeah.
And we've got to create an environment where people feel safe to speak and put things on the table in our board meetings.
Yeah. And I think just to finish off, one thing I'll finish off with, you've all touched it. Don't do someone else's job. That's just going to destroy the organisation. If you're the chairman, particularly, and potentially board members, as soon as you start doing the CEO's job or butting in on recruiting or we need to get this player or what's going on here, you're done. Someone might as well walk out of the organisation, because that's the best way to build trust. And that gets around that role clarity. And that's, I think we've all touched, that's the delicate process about works too much, what's not enough. So if you're doing other people, you're the chairman, someone's going to be walking out. It's either you or the CEO, because everyone can see it. Everyone knows there's trust within the organisation, and that's the absolute worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I was going to say probably the best. It's like everything. Like the best boards will be, you won't even notice them.
Yeah.
Because they'll be just going on, doing the job, doing all the work in the background.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like if you're not being noticed, and you're probably doing a good job from a proactive sense. What
comes to mind, Murph, is P. O'Neill at Richmond. What an amazing job she's done. And most people, and I met her a couple of times, such a lovely person, and obviously extremely, intelligent, standards, set. But most people probably, if you ask the question, who was the chairman during Richmond's premiership run, people would go, oh, actually, I'm not. It's a really, that, as you said, I reckon that's a really good test of a really good chairman. CEO Brendan Gale, they could name it, obviously the coach Damien Hardwick, but most people would go, I reckon that's a bit of a litmus test, isn't it? That if we're not really sure about who the chairman is, that's probably a sign that they're doing a really good job.
Yeah, it's not about.
Yeah, it's not about them. Yep. No, great conversation.
Good stuff. Well, great combo.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Em.
Thanks, Rosie. Thanks, Jez. Chris.
Thanks, guys. Go Suns.
No worries. All right, guys. We'll see you all next week on the Culture Cows Live. Thanks very much.